On-ice training camp sessions have begun in Maple Leafs camp, and we have our first set of line combinations to react to. So let's get into it on today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome into the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leaf-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and you'll get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. What's going on, Dave? How are we feeling on a Friday?
Doing pretty good. Looks like you had a nice little tidy victory for the team. What are we calling it again?
Hazenbro.
Team
Okay. Hazenbro. Yes, we were victorious. I was on the Jets, Jets, and they came through with a big old dub tonight. That Patriots team, poof, they suck, man. That O-line is just rancid. So yeah, nice dub. Picked up a couple bucks on FanDuel as well, I might add. But it was a big day in Maple Leafs camp, obviously, so we can get right to it. We've been doing kind of Leafs burning questions of the day. And I think today's, burning question could be, what lineup decision from day one of camp caught your eye? We know that, it's day one and things are subject to change, obviously. But we got our first little glimpse of what Craig Berube is thinking might work out in the future. He's been scribbling things on napkins for a couple of weeks now, a couple of months now, rather. And for the first time, we got to see it all in action a little bit today. So there were 3 practice groups. There was a group A, there was a group B, and then there was a developmental group, which was more so prospects and guys who were expected to be part of the Marlies fold. So today we're just going to look at each group and just kind of see, all right, what caught our eye in terms of the pairings, the groupings, the trios, the duos on the blue line. And does it tell us anything about what Craig Berube is maybe thinking heading into his first season as the head coach of the Toronto Maple Leafs? So why don't we take a peek at Group A first, and we could kind of pick it apart. And if anything caught your eye, Dave, you let me know, because there's a couple things right off the bat that to me, I certainly caught my eye. What about you?
Well, I mean, to no surprise of Matthews and Marner being together, I know some people were thinking maybe that dream would finally end, or that idea would finally end. Personally,
let me quickly, actually, for the podcast listeners, I realized who are audio version, they're not looking at the screen,
right,
and they don't see the names. So let me just quickly go through them actually first, and then we could break them down. So Marner, Matthews, and Nyes is one line. Tavares centering Nick Robertson and Bobby McMahon is another line. Jacob Quillen centering Alex Nylander and Easton Cowan, which was an interesting spot for him to be. Defensively, you had Riley Tanev, which we all expected to see. Noah Chadwick with Connor Timmins, Marshall Refi, and William Villeneuve. So Villeneuve, who was not at prospect camp, is at Maine Leafs camp. He was on the ice today, so that's good to see. And then Dakota Mermis and Philip Myers, 2 guys who expect to factor in as a pairing, probably in the American League together day one at camp. So those were the pairings and groupings we saw from Group A. I think Steves, Pare, and Clifford were also part of it. But those guys don't expect to be part of the main group anyway. But of the trios or of the deep pairings that you're looking at here, I guess now what sticks out to you?
Well, yeah, as I was talking about with Marner and Matthews sticking together, I'm curious if it's something that is going to remain all year. Are we going to see some tweaks? Likely, you usually see some sort of tweaks, but I know there was always a thought that maybe having them apart would always be better. But we've seen this coaching staff decide to keep them together, and I'm not surprised about Tavares and McMahon playing with each other.
Mhm.
because when Bob McMahon came up, it was with John Tavares that he played with, and they had a lot of success together. I am surprised though that it's Robertson with them and not Cal Yarncroke like it was during last season.
Yes, as am I. And a little later on in the show, I'm going to go through what I believe the day one lineup card should look like. So, like, if it was, head coach Mike and I had the lineup card, how would I deploy the troops? And that's how I have it as a little sneak peek. McMahon, Tavares, and Yarncroc as the third line. But on day one of camp, John Tavares is getting a shot, or Nick Robertson's getting the spot alongside McMahon and Tavares. And then Yarncroc, we'll get to it a little later, was with Nylander and
Max Domi.
so yeah, the interesting decisions there for Craig Berube on day one, but I guess he just wants to make sure that there's someone who could score, but also someone who's defensively responsible on all three lines or all four lines, I suppose. So that could be the reason there. But for me, honestly, the thing that kind of made me scratch my head a little bit was Jared. I keep wanting to call him Jared Easton Cowan, um, not playing with like NHLers. You know what I mean? Like Alex Nylander or Jacob Quillen. Okay, they're gonna try and compete for a spot, but I don't see them as viable candidates to make the team out of camp. We talked a lot about whether or not Cowan was going to get a legitimate shot or an opportunity to show off what he can do. Well, not playing with top tier talent, with NHL talent, with potential line mates, if he does make the team out of camp, for me, just looks a little odd if you are giving him a real shot.
That is really true, right? But this is also like the I want to show what I can do group, and maybe that's what they want. I don't remember who he played with last year in camp. I eventually at one point during the games, he did get more minutes. He did play a more prominent role. Maybe that's what they want. They want him to kind of stand out a little bit on his own rather than putting him with NHLers. That could be it, but yeah,
Maybe.
it is a little surprising that you're not considering how much talk there has been about Easton Cowan and looking for him to really make a step up, that he isn't given that afforded that opportunity right away.
Yeah, that to me was probably like when we look at Group A, which is the one we're looking at right now, the one that
Yeah.
was most puzzling to me, I guess. And just to quickly go off your point about Matthews, Marner, and Nyes, I like that trio. I think that is probably the Leafs' best chance to create as much offense as possible with that line. I think Nyes is in for a big year, and clearly, he's a guy who put on a lot of weight. So he puts on 10 pounds of muscle. He's here to be bigger, stronger, and faster than he was a season ago. And he wants to play that north-south game. He's a dude who's going to go into the corners and try and rip pucks off of defenders. He's going to be hard on the forecheck. And that's exactly what Craig Berube wants out of him. So he's going to ask him to do those things so that they can set up some offensive zone pressure with Matthews and Marner and go get pucks for those guys, fish them in the corner, and then scoot it up to those two who are going to be in front of the net. So I really really like that decision, and I'm glad that Berube is going to it right away and give those guys a chance to really find that chemistry. We saw it a little bit last year. They did play together. It's not like it's the first time that we've seen them,
Right.
but it's nice to see that right away. Berube wants to get a look at it too, because he clearly sees there could be some big time potential with that trio of Nyes, Matthews, and Marner. Let's take a break, and then when we come back, let's look at Group B, and then a little bit later on, I'm going to show you what my ideal lineup card would look like. We'll call it the lineup projection 1.0 heading into the season. So we'll get to all that more coming up next on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Gametime is a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through the thousands of tickets on the site. They've got all-in pricing. You've got tremendous seat views, which give you a panoramic view from your seat right in the app before you buy it. And they've got the lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL, and get $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. What is it? Gametime. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you as we are each and every day, Monday through Friday, going through all things Maple Leafs, covering the group from pillar to post this season. And, things kicked off today with some on-ice training sessions, the first of its kind in the Craig Berube era. So we're kind of just reacting to some of the line combinations that we saw on day one. And it's, I guess, a little peek into the brain of Berube to see what he thinks might work, what he wants to try. So we went through Group A. Now it's time to go through Group B, Dave. So let's throw up the lineup combinations that we saw for Group B, and then we can kind of dissect them from here. So for those listening, for those viewing, obviously on YouTube, you can see what the lineup looks like. For those listening on the go in the car, or wherever you're listening to your podcast at, it looks like this. You had Nylander playing center, as we reported yesterday was going to be the case. There's some more news on that. He spoke on it. We'll get to that in a second. So he's centering Calle Jarnkrok and Max Domi. We've got Max Pacioretty alongside Pontus Holmberg and Nikita Grabankin, which is an interesting little lineup. Steven Lorentz, Kampf, and Reeves as one line, and then Roni Hirvonen, Logan Shaw, and Nick Abruzzese is the other forward grouping. If you want to scroll down, and we could get to the defense as well, because this is where things get interesting. Oliver Ekman-Larsson and Jake McCabe begin camp together. That one I find to be very notable. Timothy Liljegren and Cade Weber together. And then Kokkonen Niemela and Petroniro, I should know how to say that. Sounds like a very Italian name. And Matanen together. A couple prospects with Group B. So, to you, do you want to start? Let's start with the defense with this one, because I feel like this is where things get interesting. Because going into the training camp and going into the season, really, I think we're all in favor of Morgan Rielly, Chris Tanev pairing, and that's going to be your first pair, right? Like nobody doesn't want to see that happen. But then you aren't exactly sure what the second and third pair are going to look like. You know what 4 players are going to be, playing on a nightly basis? OEL, Liljegren, McCabe, and Simon Benoit, who missed today, by the way, because he was having a child. So congratulations to him and his partner. But things start out with Oliver Ekman-Larsson and McCabe starting to see if they can build some chemistry together. What do you think of that to start things off?
Interesting. I'm wondering though if part of that was also Simon Benoit being absent. Did that change things a little bit? Maybe not.
I don't think it does, because I think you would, if that were the case, then I think Benoit would have had the placeholder, right? You probably would have had Weber, McCabe as your placeholder, and then OEL and Liljegren, who've never played together, would have an opportunity to try and build chemistry right from the start of camp. So for me, Weber, Liljegren, Weber's the placeholder for Simon Benoit.
Yeah, and people were saying, well, Liljegren on the left. Maybe that's just like
it's just a typo. I think
it's just a typo. I just think that's a switch.
Yeah.
It's interesting that OEL and McCabe are gonna give it a go, just because we saw how well the Benoit McCabe pairing looked last year, right? But I think it also just speaks to Oliver Ekman-Larsson was brought in not on a 1-year deal, right? Like this is a guy they want to establish. This is someone that they obviously have a lot of faith can play a good chunk of, a decent role here, right? They're not just going to staple him to the third pairing. I mean, just by what we were seeing right now, right? So I am very curious to see how that dynamic works with OEL and McCabe together. I think that's just because we haven't really seen like McCabe away from Benoit. I think that's going to take some getting used to now, seeing him with somebody else.
Well, I just think it maybe speaks to the fact that Riley Tanev is going to be the shutdown pair. Like typically the second pair you look at and it's like, okay, there's your shutdown pair. I wonder if we're going to see a lot more Riley Tanev going up against, opposing teams' top lines as opposed to McCabe and whoever he's with. Because if it's OEL, you don't feel as strongly about that being, part of shutdown pair. He hasn't been, defensively efficient for a few years now. He's more of a, a smooth skating puck moving defenseman, and that works, I guess, in the defensive end. You got to transport the puck up to the forwards, and he could do that and try and get the puck out of danger and flip the ice. But yeah, that's just something that goes through my mind a little bit. Maybe it's not a traditional second pair shutdown pair situation. Maybe Riley Tanev will get a lot more responsibilities in defensive zone starts than we initially thought, or that we typically see out of a Morgan Riley pairing.
Yeah, and that comes with bringing in Tanev, as you said, right? He's not being brought in here to play any sheltered role. They do want to play, and they're going to want to play him in a lot of those defensive situations. That's just what he was brought in here to do. And you're not going to put a Chris Tanev on the second pairing. Like, it was already kind of established as soon as he was signed, it was going to be him with Morgan Riley. We already knew that, joined at the hip, and so it was interesting also just to see how they're going to use Liljegren, who's he going to be with, right, and things like that. So I am curious to see how that whole thing develops, and there is going to be some decisions to be made on the blue line because you're going to be having your six, but then we've always talked about what's after that, right? Who are the guys that they're going to be moving around? Who's going to be the eighth, the eighth and the ninth guys to be called up to? So, like,
I think they've got a pretty good grasp of their their top eight. It's after that, you're looking at like Myers, Mermies, maybe Niemela and Villanove could, develop into something and get an opportunity this year. But, Riley, Tanev, OEL, McCabe, Benoit, Liljegren, that's your six. Hakanpää is going to be your seven. And I would imagine Timmins is your eight. And then from there, pick anyone out of the litter. There's a big cluster of guys who are going to compete and try and show off that maybe they can be the next Simon Benoit, perhaps. But yeah, I don't think there's going to be much competition on the blue line. I think it's you've like I think we know who's going to make the team out of camp. It's just where they play, right? Does the chemistry build with OEL and McCabe right away? Like they'll give it a shot. They'll play a few games, and then we'll kind of see if it's working. All right, keep it. Let's let it ride. If it's not, and they're fishing pucks out of the back of their net, quite often, I'm sure we'll see a switch up, and maybe Benoit ends up back up with McCabe at some point. But we know that Benoit McCabe works, right? Berube knows this. I know he was the coach last year, but he could probably watched a lot of film from this team a season ago to try and learn from, what they did wrong and try and get things to work out better. And what he probably learned was, all right, this works. We know it works. And if OEL McCabe doesn't, we can always go back to Benoit. So I think it's smart right away just to see if these two can stick together. And realistically, they're paying OEL to be a more prominent role than they're paying Simon Benoit. So money wise, they probably would rather OEL McCabe work out as a second pairing as well.
And also, you view the ceiling of OEL a little bit higher than the Simon Benoit as well.
Yeah, 100%. Like Benoit should be a third pair guy. Like, let's be honest. Like he was punching above his weight last year, but he slots in better as a third pair dude. Let's throw up the forward lines because we didn't really get to dive into those quite yet. We went straight to the D, but there was, a couple of things that I thought were interesting. We kind of spoke about Yarncroc being on a line with Nylander and Domi. I think it makes sense. Again, you just want to have somebody who's defensively responsible on that line who you trust. So Yarncroc can be that guy. He's a 200-foot player. I also found it really interesting. Nylander was speaking today with the media, and they had asked him, like, hey, well, what are your thoughts on being, center again here? And do you think that you're going to get a legitimate run this time? And he came out and flat out said, like, yes, I told Chief, a.k.a. Craig Berube, if I'm going to do this and we're going to give this a shot, we got to give it a real shot, not just one or two games. I want to give this a legitimate chance. And they're both in lockstep that this is going to be an actual not experiment. They're going to run with it for a little bit. I don't know what that means. Does that mean all of camp? Does that mean a few games into the regular season? I don't know. I guess that still remains to be seen. But it's nice to see that both Willie and the coach are in lockstep, that they're going to give this a decent run, it looks like, to see if it could work. Because I think everyone on board believes that, this team could be far more balanced and efficient if he could be the second line center and Tavares can be the 3C.
Well, yeah, and a lot of the same tone as to last year too, when they were talking about it, like we want to give it a little bit of run, we want to give it opportunity.
Last year they didn't. They played him like 1 or 2 games. They're like,
Yeah,
nah, we're gonna scrap it.
like it was. I mean, like it was talked about that way, but it didn't
Yeah.
end up actually, it's being established like that. Like he said, literally, I'm excited. I told Chief the most important thing is like you can't just play one game if you want to try center. So we agree on that. Give it a go, and hopefully it goes well.
Yes.
Right. So I think, and then they were asking like, how come Nylander didn't get a longer look at center if it was a priority last year? And he's like, what did I play? One game? I don't know. You might have to ask my old coach about that.
Yeah. He kind of chuckled when he said that, but yeah, it's a new coach. It sounds like they're both in agreement that it can't just be 1-2 games here in the preseason. He's gonna have to be given a legitimate run. If they want to test it, give it an actual test run, not just a
Yeah.
couple of fluff games that mean nothing, that you're not going to glean anything. He's got to figure out what works, what doesn't, what can I get away with, what can't I, how do I fix mistakes? And that happens in more than just 1 or 2 games. Considering he hasn't played center sparingly, he's a very long time since he's played down the middle. So yeah, I'm excited to see how it all goes, how it all works out. So that was something that obviously was eye popping to start camp, and now we know that it's going to be a legitimate run, legitimate chance to see if it can stick. Bring it up once more because I want to get your thoughts on those other two middle trios there: Pacioretty, Holmberg, and Grabankin, and then Lorentz, Kampf, and Reeves. If you had to pick one of those 3 forward groupings to be this team's 4th line, which one would you prefer, Dave?
I would take the Pacioretty, Holmberg, Bankin trio for a couple reasons. One, Grabankin, if you hear Craig Berube today, what did he mention? Size and skill. Really impressed by that. And we know Holmberg's got some skill to him as well. I know that defensively there are some things he's got to work at. And like Pacioretty, if you're gonna want a scoring touch on the 4th line, out of everyone there, we know that Max Pacioretty is going to be the guy to do it, right? He is the one that provides it. Now, does that line specifically have the physicality, right? And maybe defensive acumen that like a Lorentz, Kampf, I mean Reeves, we don't expect him to have much of a defensive acumen, but the physicality for sure. I just think the upside of that Pacioretty, Holmberg, Bankin trio speaks a lot louder than the other.
I agree, but it's interesting. I felt like the rage online through X, and I even spoke with David Alter of the Hockey News about it, and I got the sense from others that they felt as though Pacioretty was slighted by being on that line because they felt like the Kampf trio was more so the group that has a better shot to be, the 4th line of the Maple Leafs, where I kind of felt the opposite. I felt similarly to you, where I would actually prefer the other one, and that the Reeves, Lorentz, and Kampf trio kind of looking like guys who are on the outside looking in, whereas
Yeah.
that other group looks like a pretty solid, situation, if you ask me. So I'm kind of fascinated to see how, that we talked about how there's going to be a lot of depth competition within camp. I think that's one right there. Like those 6 guys kind of competing for 3 spots. And it's going to be fascinating to see how it turns out. That's one of the best for the next little bit. Um, I don't think their Hervonen, Shaw, or Abruzzese line has any real factor here
That's
myself.
your top
But
line for the Toronto Marlies starting
yeah,
this season.
that's probably what you're looking at there with that one. All right. So if is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the lineups? Was there anything else that stood out to you? Speak now, forever hold your peace, Dave.
No, I think what we saw and wasn't anything like, oh my god, this happened. Like, nah,
Yeah.
I didn't really get much of that.
And again, like today's overreaction Thursday, day one, right? I mean, these lineups are all going to be jumbled up and changed throughout camp. I'm well aware of this, but we're just taking it day by day, reacting to the news of Thursday, and by Monday after the preseason game, things will change. By the way, first preseason game on Monday, or on Sunday, I should
Mhm.
note. So when we come back for Monday's show, we'll have a game to react to, and we'll get to see these guys in action. Not quite sure if it's going to be Group A or Group B that is going to be playing. I don't know if you saw that news or not. I'm sure that's
I
something
think
that
it's a
we'll
little
find
early
out.
for them to really determine. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll probably find that out either Friday or Saturday. Who ends up playing Ottawa on Sunday, but one of those groups we'll get to see in action on Sunday. All right. On the other side, Dave, I'm going to unveil my lineup card. It's going to be my lineup projection 1.0. I'm sure we'll do this a couple of times throughout camp and certainly before the season starts. But we're going to get the first installment of the lineup, and that's coming up on the other side. I'm Mike DiStefano with Dave Morassutti. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. Well, we've got something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then all you'll have to do with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season afternoon game. And all you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. Just visit fanduel.com to download America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano and Dave Morassutti with you. I'm curious, did you see anything about kind of how the vibe was at practice today, the intensity levels, or anything like that in day one under Craig Berube, or how different maybe things were under Berube than they'd been in the past under Sheldon Keefe?
I wouldn't say like different, but I did hear that it was very intense. It was tiring. Like the guys were pushed, and it's usually like that on the first day, right? Like coaches are sending a message like we want to play with intensity. We want, like, you heard this a lot from Craig Berube, intensity, identity, right? Get it? Like they want to establish that right from the beginning. And what he said was, despite how like intense everything was, the pace wasn't lacking.
Hmm.
So, and like you kind of expect, these guys have been skating the last little bit. These guys have been doing their own training sessions. They've already had some of these guys have had their own training camps,
Yeah.
right? Like, this
Yeah.
is just now we're getting into a more formal skate, right? So it's not surprising in that regard. So I don't think really, I don't think anyone should be surprised if they said like it was very intense. That's usually
Yeah.
how it goes first day.
Yeah. I was speaking with David Alter earlier today, and I asked him the same question if he felt like there was a different vibe, anything different. And the only thing that he said was, he definitely noted on the intensity. And he said the biggest difference is Sheldon Keefe. Typically, there's a lot more bag skating, I guess, at the start of camp. They did a lot more conditioning at the start of camp under Sheldon Keefe, where today it was, let's get some contact in there. Let's put some body on body. And apparently they did a lot of puck battle drills today, which isn't necessarily something that they harp on typically. But he's looking to set an identity and be hard to play against. And, nothing's harder than winning puck battles in the NHL. So it makes sense that on day one, that's what he's trying to instill. So he's trying to build up the calluses on the players right away. So that was really the big difference that I had heard. That was between Berube's camp and the start of a typical Sheldon Keefe camp. All right, it's time to unveil my first mock lineup, my projected starting lineup come night one of the NHL opening night game against the Montreal Canadiens. This is what I would do. It's not necessarily a projection, I suppose, as to what I think it'll be, but what I would do if I were Craig Berube, if I had the coach's card in the lineup at my disposal. How would I put these players all together and deploy the troops? So we can bring it up, and then I'll kind of go through it and you can let me know what you think. So I've got Nyes, Matthews, and Marner. Like that's the line, and we saw it obviously unveiled today as a line that they have in practice. So I think I was spot on with wanting to see that being the top line for the Maple Leafs, and with a good showing in camp, probably going to be likely as well. Then I had Nylander down the middle at center, flanked by Max Domi and Nick Robertson. I thought this could be a line that comes in and like pure offense. Like there's not a lot of defense to that line. It's not a grouping that I figured would really have a lot of defensive zone starts. It's kind of a team where they get an offensive face off. All right, let's check out that second line and let's see if they can go to work in the ozone. That was kind of the thought process there, which left a great checking line as my third line, which was John Tavares with Bobby McMahon and Calle Yarncroc. And then my fourth line, I had Pacioretty making the team as the left winger, along with David Kampf as the center. And then I had Pontus Holmberg actually as the right winger. And two of those three guys were together today, Pacioretty and Holmberg. Holmberg playing down the middle. So I don't know. Maybe Kampf could possibly be, on the outside looking in. Maybe they're looking at possibly trying to move off of David Kampf if they get into a bit of a cap crunch. That would certainly be something that they might look at. So that was my forward groupings. Defensively, I had Riley and Tanev. We all expect to see that to be the case come night one. So that's no surprise there. I did have Benoit McCabe as my defensive grouping, but really, I wouldn't even mind if it was OEL McCabe. I'm glad actually that we're starting off training camp with OEL McCabe. Gives us a chance to see what it looks like. Because again, if it doesn't look good, we can go right back to Benoit McCabe, and we know that that's going to be perfectly fine. But for now, I had Benoit McCabe as my second pair, and then OEL and Liljegren, a little Swedish connection there with those two players, and then obviously Joseph Woll, the starting goaltender, with Stolar sitting on the bench as the backup. So that is my projected starting lineup for game one. Injuries obviously notwithstanding. That's what I would do if I had the lineup card. What do you think, Dave?
I mean, it's pretty much where I was leaning towards, right? When you look at how to make the lineup work. I thought maybe the only thing is, I don't know, maybe Nick Robertson makes the top six, right? And I thought, well, who else could you put there? I didn't think Calle Yarncroc right away. I thought maybe Bobby McMahon, just because you get a little bit of size and physicality on that second line. And I think that's something that's going to be needed there because, yeah, it's going to be speed. And Bobby McMahon, I think, is able to play with pace. But, yeah, I feel like there's that need for a little bit of size and physicality on that second line. That's why I wasn't sure if I would put Nick Robertson there.
Yeah,
and
Domi can offer that, right? Like he's got jam.
He has jam. It's just, does he have? Do you want him to be that player, right? He is gonna have to be the one to do a lot of the setting up, a lot of the playmaking on that line because Robertson and Nylander like to have the puck on their sticks.
And they're good at shooting the puck. So you get an elite all-world passer like Domi involved to set them up, set it up on a tee for them. I do like that pairing. And it's interesting. I was going to talk about pairings, right? Like we always use pairing as a defensive term, but the last few years, it seems like the Maple Leafs have done things in pairs. But that was under Sheldon Keefe. So, I wonder if that's going to remain a thing. Like, I could see possibly, I'm just looking and you mentioned, oh, I'm surprised, McMahon, wasn't with Nylander and Domi. Could have saw that happening. Well, I think you could look at it and say, Matthews Marner, that's a pair. They want to get a look at that, and that's going to remain. Nylander Domi, there's pair number 2. And I think McMahon and Tavares could be pair number 3. And then they kind of just figure everything else out however it slots and fits.
Yeah, no, I think it makes a lot of sense. I think especially with Bob McMahon. I think he's earned himself I think he's going to be another guy that's going to earn a lot of respect from the coaching staff with the way he plays,
for sure.
and I think he'll work well with Tavares as well.
Yep. I mean, when he had his little, I don't even call it little, but like he had like 7 goals in a 5-game span or something like that. He was playing excellent for a little stretch run there. Pretty sure he was playing with Tavares at that time.
He
So,
was.
he's a guy who doesn't mind going to the net. So, I think McMahon could have himself a pretty good year. They're hoping to find some internal improvements, some internal growth from guys, and that's the way to try and fill the 20 goals left by Tyler Bertuzzi. I think McMahon could chip in a few more goals. Robertson could chip in a few more goals. Nyes obviously could. I mean, Domi only scored 9 last year. I think he could definitely get you 15,
Yeah.
16 goals as well if he's going to get top 6 minutes alongside Nylander. So, I think that the team's not going to have issues scoring. The big deal is going to be on the blue line. Can it all come together and work? Can they stay healthy? Is another big question mark, obviously, with the guys that they brought in. But that's what's always going to be the question about this team is the defense is bigger, they're stronger, they're older. Are they better? We believe so. But I guess we'll have to see when it all kind of plays out.
Yeah, and and looking at your lineup too, I'll bring it back up just for those who hadn't or want to see it again. The camp, I think he's the biggest question mark for me, right? Like he needs if he's either gonna have to have a big bounce back, or he's my first candidate to potentially move out if you can, right? It's not an easy contract to move out. It's a hefty cap hit for the type of player that he is.
Yeah, I think he's got 2.4 million at 2 more years after this, so like 3 years of contracts left this year and 2 more.
Yeah, so to me, that's a player there that I want to. I've always said to get that 4-year commitment. I mean, good on him, but that's a lot of money that's a lot of money to pay out for a player that has to show that he's more than just a defensive center.
Yeah. I will also say this, and I'm just thinking of this now. The lineup that we saw deployed today was Pacioretty, Holmberg, and Grabankin. One player who's not in camp to start that could totally take over that role and who I believe is probably suited perfectly as a fourth line winger for this team is Connor Dewar, who I didn't have in my lineup, and it was because
Yeah,
I don't know what his status is going to be, if he's going to be ready for camp, or at what point he'll be ready. Just had off-season shoulder surgery.
yeah,
But if they like Holmberg down the middle and they have him slotted as a fourth line center, they've got Pacioretty as a fourth line left wing. The right wing spot's wide open. Whether it's Reeves, whether it's Connor Dewar, or there's a couple of guys out there who could be battling for that role, right? So David Kampf, if they get into a cap crunch, I think for sure he's someone who could be on the chopping block, similarly to how Sam Lafferty was last year.
yeah. Like 2 point. Like we're not talking about like a guy who's making $1 million or $1.3 million, like a Ryan Reeves. We're talking about a guy who's making 2.4. Like I feel like that's that's cap space that could be better spent elsewhere, just based on what the needs are on you want a little bit of depth, you want some options. You don't want to have to be in a cap crunch and be a shorthanded roster potentially just because you want to keep David Kampf around.
Yeah,
Right.
and I mean the guy's just he doesn't provide you much offense,
No.
and I think they want more offense from the bottom six. Flat out, they just want more offense.
Yeah.
Defense obviously is very important, but they also do want that tertiary offense from the bottom six. All right, that's lineup projection 1.0 in the books. In the books, 2.0 will come out at some point over the next week or two, I would imagine. But that'll do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself on Twitter at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys on Monday. Again, first preseason game on Sunday. So we'll get a chance to watch it. We'll come back Monday and we'll break it all down for you. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.